I remember being around when, and most of you, I'm of the generation, Josh, you're not, you poor bugger, in which there were external examinations roughly this time of the year, every year, um, that acted as a sort of a drafting agent. You know how farmers will draft sheep and they'll say, yep, you're going to the works, no, you're going to stay here and you're going to breed, and you were drafting sheep. Well, in the days in which school certificate was very much that drafting exercise, so yep, you're going to go on to some sort of academic sit-down career in the office, and nope, you're going to be working outside or at the freezing works or on the roads or something like that. And school certificate played that role, oh gosh, 50s, 60s, 70s. And then people decided that they didn't like that, and so they needed something that was going to test the skills better, so they created NCEA, which was, the theory was that NCEA and the external examinations of, but particularly the qualification itself, would replace school certificate, university entrance, university bursary, higher school certificate, and it would more adequately test what a student knew and what they didn't know, and therefore for student, parent, potential employer, provide a much more robust qualification that would instill confidence in all concerned, including, one presumes, the teaching profession, that children were going out armed into the modern world with a qualification that was modern and was understood and referenced by all. God, what's happened? Now, the latest ERO report on NCEA Level 1 has just come out, as the NCEA results have also come out for last year. They're not particularly good. Joining us to talk about it and whether we're making any progress in this area at all, a year into the new coalition government, is Dr. Nina Hood, and she joins us now. Nina, welcome to the show. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
I think I've given a pretty adequate explanation of that. When did NCEA come in? Was it about 2000, was it?
Yeah, so I was actually the last year to go through bursary. So that would mean that level 1 came in 2002, I believe.
2002, okay. And it was meant to be a much better qualification. I can remember the ministers of education at the time, and I think the work was initially started by Lockwood Smith, wasn't it? The former National Party Minister of Education. It was going to be a much better qualification that would be instantly portable and instantly reputable. What happened?
Yeah, that was the intention. And I think one of the key reasons for bringing in NCEA as opposed to the old school certificate and bursary was that under the old system, essentially it was set up so that 50% of students failed. So they used to go through a scaling process. And so it wasn't necessarily a test of, do you actually meet the grade? So you were marked on a bell curve. And when we think about NCEA, what that was trying to do, it was moving to what's called a standard-based assessment. So if you reach the standard set, then you pass, and now you pass with achieved merit or excellence. I think what's happened across the years is that whilst there are positives to having a standard-based assessment, and I do support that. I don't support a system where you automatically have 50% fail. There are obviously some pretty big challenges and issues with NCEA as it's currently standing.
Yes, and the big issue here that the ERO have identified is that it's a two-tier system. So I can get through my NCEA levels 1, 2, and 3 and get sufficient credits without ever sitting an external examination. And vice versa, if I have to sit external examinations, it's almost a different qualification. Have I got that right? Is that what Education Review Office are complaining about?
So that is one of the issues. So issues around the reliability and validity of it as an assessment tool. So one of the things that NCEA does allow is greater flexibility in terms of how students navigate their path through the qualifications system. And there are benefits associated with having a degree of flexibility so that you can suit, the student and their needs. However, some of the consequences of that, as you've pointed out, are that there's wild inconsistencies in terms of how different students actually achieve NCEA. So one of those is some students might get it entirely or nearly entirely through internal assessment. And one of the things we know about the internal assessments is that you're twice as likely to get an excellence grade on an internal assessment as opposed to an external assessment. I think some of the other issues are
Why is
around
that? Is
how
that
you can
because
cherry
teachers
pick.
aren't doing their job properly, or is that because, yeah, the kids don't like external examinations, so it scares the bejesus out of them and they fail when they actually get into that sort of closed environment?
Yeah. So I don't know if we actually fully know the answer to that. I think probably part of it is around the moderation processes of internal assessment and the fact that they are marked by teachers at the school. Possibly part of it's to do with the nature of the assessments, those that are classed as internal, those that are classed as external. And then we also know that some students do get exam anxiety, which can affect their performance.
So that means that, and I can't compare apples with apples, can I? Because if I've got an internally assessed NCEA qualification level 1 from, I don't know, a rural school in Northland compared to a decile 10 school with an emphasis on, excellence at the other end, I don't have a qualification that's the same. I might have because of the moderation standards, and I've struck this just locally, actually, I can tell you, Nina, are so different and variable between the schools. One qualification doesn't necessarily mean the same as another, does it?
That's correct. And, I would argue that we want to have a degree of flexibility within any sort of qualification system, but we also want to make sure that there's consistency so that, if a student does get level 2 NCEA, that it is relatively comparable to another student that achieves level 2 or whatever other level. I think the other key difference is that because students are able to pick different standards to do, you get an atomization of knowledge. So you're not necessarily learning the whole of a subject. You can just cherry pick different parts of it.
Absolutely.
And that
Yeah.
also has long-term implications for students, particularly those who are going to university who might not have developed that breadth of knowledge that they actually need to succeed.
Can I give an example of that, Nina? My daughter, this week, no, last week, sat NCEA English scholarship. All right. So NCEA level 3 scholarship. Oh, there's only obviously one scholarship level. She's never studied Shakespeare at any time at all. And so she'll go to university and she'll do English and she will meet Shakespeare for the very first time. It's extraordinary to me that you can go through an entire English level to that highest degree and potentially get a scholarship in English and you'll have never come across Shakespeare. Doesn't that strike you as strange?
Yeah. So English is a really interesting one, and there's actually been some quite good research done by New Zealand researchers on the nature of texts that students are studying during their secondary schooling. And it's not just a question of Shakespeare, but, a number of students can actually achieve their NCEA without ever having read a book.
Yes.
So you've never
Yes.
had to read a
Yes.
full-length novel, for example.
Yeah.
You're just using shorter texts or film. And it's not that there's not value in studying film or poetry or short stories, but what we want to do is to ensure that students are getting really rich opportunities to learn, and importantly, that all students are getting those rich opportunities to learn.
I remember when Chris Hipkins was the Minister of Education, I think when the platform first started 2.5 years ago, you were one of my first guests. And we were talking about at that time, and that was before Jacinda Ardern had stepped down and he'd stepped up and he was the Minister of Education. And he was talking at that time about reforming NCEA so that there was always going to be an external exam assessment part of that qualification. And then there was a sort of a discussion, at that time, loose discussion within education circles, that it was going to be sort of 50% internally assessed and 50% external examination. What happened to that?
Great question. So there have been a number of different reform cycles. But at the moment, so there's new level 1 this year that has come out, but then there's been a pause on level 2 and level 3. So at the moment, we're in a sort of hiatus period if no one's quite sure what's going to happen in terms of NCEA reforms or where we're going to get to. And I think with this new ERO report coming out, I think we're probably going to see another sort of refocusing, rethinking about what it is we want to do and where we want to go to.